Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome back after lunch. I hope you had a good one and aren't feeling too sleepy while you're digesting your lunch. We'll hopefully wake you up if you are. So I'm David Matthews. I'm the international editor at Science Business. And so I'm going to be chairing this panel on international defense R&D collaboration. Now, I cover the EU's scientific relations, technology relations with other powers, the US, China, Japan, UK, and so on. And I guess this debate is a kind of particularly sensitive microcosm of that broader question. How much does the EU seek strategic autonomy, developing its own technologies, keeping its most sensitive research to itself, or does it partner with international partners a bit more freely and openly? And we're going to be looking at what schemes there are at the moment, the hurdles to international collaboration, the extent of existing collaboration, and so on. From being here this morning, you obviously all know the context. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so that the EU needs to develop far greater defense powers, including in R&D. That kind of thing requires international partners. But at the same time, the traditional alliances of NATO, for example, are looking a little bit fractured. We're not quite sure what the US is going to do over the next 6 months, year or so, depending on the upcoming election there. So there's a lot of uncertainty around, and it's this perennial open versus closed question that the EU has to grapple with in defense R&D. So I've got a great panel here for you. I'll introduce them. So far end here we have Liam Benham, who is President of EU, NATO, and Government Affairs Europe for Boeing International. Hello, Liam. We also have Julie McCann, who is Vice Dean for Research and Head of Adaptive Emergent Systems Engineering at Imperial College London. And finally, to my left here, we have Ninka Tikchelar, who is Head of Unit for the European Defence Fund's implementation at DG DEFIS, of course, at the European Commission. So welcome to you all. We have a US, UK, and EU representative on the panel here today, so it should be a very interesting framework for discussion. So I'll start off with you, Ninka. I'd like you to all kind of outline the current state of defense R&D collaboration in your various institutions. So Ninka, if you could just give me a sense of, in the EDF, what the kind of rules are on who can collaborate on these calls from outside the EU, what level of collaboration you have, and give me a sense of where you want things to go. Are you wanting there to be more collaboration? You want to keep things a bit tighter, more EU focused, or are you happy with where it is at the moment?
Thank you very much, David. Yes, I first want to give a little bit of context because we're in quite a particular, situation when we speak about defense and security in the European Union. We have to keep in mind that ensuring your security and defense of your citizens is really one of the essential functions of any national public authority. So in the area of defense, security and defense has a special place in the EU treaties. So it's mostly, in the common security and defense policy, which is more the intergovernmental side of the treaties, where there's no role for European Commission and Parliament. And even member states have the right not to apply the treaties when their essential national security interests are at stake. Then we have, of course, we have NATO, which remains the cornerstone of defense for most member states. And only since 2020, we have a separate department for defense industry and space, DG DEFIS. And all activities are based on the EU industrial policy, the internal market, and the R&D. So I wanted to say that because it gives a little bit the area in which we as European Commission cooperate. Then what we of course see in the last couple of years is that because of the change of the geopolitical situation, countries have quite a lot of instruments to influence their relative power position, which much goes beyond the military, control over technologies, supply chain materials. But yet, military superiority is very much driven also by digital superiority coming more from the civil areas. So I think we have recognized in the different policy documents that we have in the European Commission and with the High Representative that there are certain areas where the EU needs to be more autonomous when it really comes to the EU security and defense interest. But also we have recognized that, of course, we have a number of dependencies. And so we also have to manage the dependencies, which is, of course, best to be done with partners, And then the elements which are important is of course the balance, the reciprocity. In Europe, we have, when it comes to defense industry, we have quite an open economy. We don't have regulations obliging member states to buy European, unlike, for example, in the US. We had very large underinvestments in defense. We have had a lack of private investors, especially when it comes to equity. We still have quite some big problems in Europe, also because the EIB still has the exclusion policy for ammunitions and weapons. So our policy recently has been very much driven by the need for the EU to be defense ready. Means that our defense industry should be able to deliver the volume and the quantity that is needed for the most extreme contingencies. And the specific problems we have in Europe is the complete fragmentation, especially when it comes to procurement. So EU member states mostly still buy from outside the EU. We have a couple of instruments, and now I come to your question because I see you getting impatient.
That's my job here.
We have the European Defence Fund was actually the first instrument we have implemented in DG DEFIS to support cooperation on defence R&D, because we wanted to find a solution to this fragmentation and to the underinvestment in Europe. So, but we also know that European member states, they have quite different attitudes when it comes to their national defense policies, from who to buy, national industry or more strategic partners. So the European Defence Fund is the place, say, where the balance was found in 2021 for these different, say, member states' approaches to defense cooperation and procurement. So we have an instrument where we fund R&D corporations of EU companies, but we also have a derogation saying that even if you are established in the EU, but you are controlled by a non-EU entity, you can also participate. And in that situation, what we require is that you need to secure your security of supply, say that you need to be able to cooperate from the beginning to the end to the project. You need to be able to protect sensitive information for not going outside the EU. And you have to protect the results that you generate with the project, that they don't immediately leave the EU. And we ask the member states to provide a guarantee for that. So that's the balance that has been found in EDF, and I think it's quite a good balance. We have over 50% of all our projects involve entities controlled outside the EU. So it's quite a successful program. We have over 1,200 different companies participating.
But you can't get money directly from the EU, can you? If you can work as an entity that's controlled outside the EU in EDF projects, but you're not eligible to receive EU money. Is that right?
Yes, you're eligible to receive money.
Oh, you are. Okay. And you have more than 50% of projects with entities controlled outside the EU. So it's the message you seem to be giving. It's quite open.
It's a quite open program where a good balance has been found between the security and defense interest of EU and its member states and the openness that we traditionally have in the EU when it comes to defense matters.
And that number, 50%, I mean, do you want to see that? Do you have a view on whether that should grow or it should stay where it is at the moment? What's the balance of thinking there?
I don't have a view on what the percentage should be. I have a view on that what we develop through the European Defence Fund stays freely accessible to the EU member states for it to build on for their defence capabilities.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that overview. That's great. I'll turn now to Liam. Liam, can you give us, again, a bit of an overview of the kind of joint R&D projects Boeing works with EU firms. I think you mentioned when we spoke before, Saab, Leonardo. There are quite a few things that you're working on at the moment.
Well, thank you, David. And first of all, it's a real pleasure to be at a science business event. I've had many interactions with this fine organization over the years, particularly during my IBM days, so it's good to be back. The first thing to say, I think, is, and it's going to be a thread running through all of my comments today, we really need to collaborate in this space. When you think about the threats we face, the rapidly changing landscape, in terms of threat, but also technology in the defense space, I think like-minded countries have no option but to collaborate and to find the right structures to collaborate. So I'll just upfront give that message. And of course, there is a lot of transatlantic collaboration. Sometimes I think there is this caricature that all European governments do is buy American off-the-shelf defense products. That is a bit of a caricature. Actually, the US mission to NATO, at the last NATO summit in Washington, DC, they produced a very good one-page fact sheet just listing all of the great projects, all of the partnerships, the co-development, the co-production, and the sustainment activities that take place between European and US companies. And I've got a few copies here if anybody is interested in taking a look at that. And just to give you some examples, Boeing and Saab of Sweden have developed something called the T7 trainer jet, which is the next generation pilot training system. And we did this in record time. We did this in 3 years, from concept right through to the first flight. It was a combination of model-based engineering, 3D design, and the most advanced manufacturing, which enabled us to do this. It's fair to say that without Boeing, this wouldn't have happened in that way, and without Saab, it wouldn't have happened in that way. So the US Air Force will be the first customer for this new trainer jet, but it will go to other air forces around the world, including here in Europe as well. Another example, I know ammunition is very topical, has been very topical due to the terrible events in Ukraine and the shortage of ammunition. Boeing has a joint partnership with Nammo of Norway, not precisely the EU, but not far off, a country very associated with the EU. And that's to produce a new generation of boosted artillery projectiles, so very fast, go very far. Again, the kind of things we need to be producing if we are to counter the threat that we face. And again, this was developed in a very quick time using the best capabilities from Nammo and the best capabilities from Boeing. I'll be also very magnanimous and mention a project of our competition, because this should not all be about Boeing. I'll mention the Eurodrone, which has been developed is lead development by Airbus, Airbus Defence, but they have decided to use the catalyst engine from General Electric, or Avio, which is the European entity of GE Aerospace. This is a fuel-efficient, digitally controlled engine. It has 3D printed parts in it, so it's very, very fuel-efficient. Interestingly, that engine by Avio was developed with the help of Clean Aviation, the joint undertaking funded by the European Union. So you just see the interconnections. EU helping to develop an engine with Avio, which is a European entity of a US parentage company, and then a joint venture with Airbus to put that into the Eurodrone. So the interlinkages here are very clear. I think we need to find more of those. Just going back to the first point I made, that if we operate in silos, that's not going to be to the benefit of our common defense, which of course underpins absolutely everything we hold dear in society, open markets, our democracy, etc. So let me finish there.
Okay, thank you very much. So picture is, it's not just Americans designing things and selling to Europeans. Simply put, it's a collaboration, is what you seem to be saying. I'll turn now to Julie, representing UK institution. I suppose, Julie, you're more on the kind of security communications side of R&D, not necessarily so much defense as such, but there's still a lot of sensitive collaboration that you do at Imperial. Can you tell me, you can tell us, what kind of work do you do with EU institutions, or indeed in Horizon Europe itself, and how easy is it to do?
Okay, so my research, everyone, is on sensor-based systems, and that's everything from hardware or 3D printed components to the software. We look at them from a cybersecurity perspective as well. So we look at how we can get those systems to be protected and how we can use those systems to protect other infrastructures. And so some of the work that I've been doing in the past on FP7 and Horizon projects have been specifically looking at how we can use these sensor systems to protect critical national infrastructure like water networks, power networks, and that sort of thing. And so, I mean, those projects were absolutely amazing. We met some fantastic people, brilliant brains together, working to try and make sure we build these robust, cost-effective systems that protect these other national infrastructures as well. I also, as you mentioned, I work in communications as well, so I head up one of the 3 hubs across the UK on telecommunications research, focusing now on 6G. And again, cybersecurity very important in that. It's a national infrastructure, and because it's communications and communications is international, obviously collaboration across the world is important to us there.
And is it easy to work with EU partners or the EU itself on Horizon Europe at the moment? I mean, the UK is now back in Horizon Europe, thank goodness.
Yes.
But I mean, there are some rules, some exclusions that still remain.
Okay, so obviously we're absolutely delighted to be back, just to say, and there was a big cheer went up when that was confirmed.
I can imagine.
In the interim, though, when things were a little bit unclear, we did see a fall away from, you know, a lot of us who would have been regularly asked to join consortia were less asked, you know, there were fewer opportunities, and you can understand that. I mean, if there's, you know, if a project becomes risky because you don't of uncertainty, then of course. Now that we're back on, I think across the college we're seeing much more activity. Some people didn't stop. I mean, they continued anyway. But we're seeing a lot more activity. We're seeing a lot of positiveness. It's not completely back to what it was, but it's close to that.
Is it particularly hard with security-sensitive research?
Well,
is that rebounded as much as everything else, or is there more reluctance to work with the UK from the EU side?
I don't know that there's any reluctance. I think what it is the vast majority of work is civil-oriented. But you know yourself, most of us are working in something like AI or things like that could be described as slightly dual use. But a lot of us, because you can get clever about how you apply it. Therefore, you can join consortia that's applying it to civil aspects. But we have people working. We have a few people in Imperial working, for example, on cybersecurity right now with European partners. Unfortunately, for those who work in the core areas that we are disallowed to join, and obviously, if that's their core area of research, they do get impacted. But the vast majority in Imperial have been okay. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all 3 for a great intro of what you're working on, the situation at the moment. Let's start to talk about kind of barriers to collaboration and how they can be overcome, maybe. I think maybe turn to Liam. I mean, when we were talking before, there are still things in eligibility and also IP transfer as well that you mentioned that kind of hinder EU-US joint work. I wonder if you could go into a little bit of detail about what your concerns might be.
Yeah, happy to, David. But I'm going to begin by saying that it's understandable that when the European Union is spending billions of euros of EU taxpayers' money, that there are rules. Obviously, in defense and security, it's one of the most sensitive areas a government will deal with. So there need to be clear security guarantees, etc. I don't think we would dispute any of that. In fact, the US would look at that in exactly the same way. I think any sovereign country or institution would look at that in the same way. Actually, we're very big supporters of the EDF because I think this has been a genuine success story for the European Union. I think the Commission, DG DEFIS, have done a great job in herding the cats, if you like to put it like that. And I know there are hundreds of applications each year to projects. There is openness, as was described earlier. This is not a totally closed shop. I think it's fair to say, from our perspective, there were maybe a few growing pains as we were watching this from a distance. The issue of security guarantees, and things like that. I think they've been ironed out a little bit. I think nationally, countries have worked out how to do this efficiently, effectively. I guess the biggest issue for a company like us would be around IP. That is subject to export controls. There really isn't much we can do about that in the short term. And it makes it near impossible for an international company to leverage our existing work and bring it, hopefully, to the benefit of a project within the EDF. Maybe there can be more flexibility on both sides about that. So this is not just an EU issue, of course. There needs to be flexibility from all sides to see how we could bring this together. But overall, I think the direction of travel of the EDF is exactly the right one. This is the kind of collaboration you need at EU level. The more scale we can get, the more collaboration, the better, as far as we're concerned.
Okay, thank you. So overall, very positive, but there are some wrinkles on IP. Inka, more flexibility on IP at the EDF, so you can bring in companies like Boeing a little bit more easily? What's your thoughts?
I think I'd rather explain a bit better, because the EDF is not setting any rules on IPR. What the EDF is saying that the results of what we fund with EU budget cannot be controlled by third states. So we can't bring in a technology where that is controlled outside the EU, and where the result of what we fund with EU money will also be controlled outside the EU. That's what we say. Secondly, what we say that IPR cannot leave the European Union without the national export rules being applied, which is not a new rule. It's simply stating the obvious, because here on when it comes to defense IPR, it's national export regulations that applies. We don't have EU rules for that. So the only thing which the EDF says is that if IPR that is developed with EDF money leaves the EU and is against the security and defense interest of the EU and member states, then we have a clawback mechanism. Now, we haven't applied it yet. We haven't had that situation yet, but that's the only thing which is it's put in the EDF regulation, so we don't set any rules on IPR. We just want to ensure that what we fund with EU money is freely accessible to EU member states.
Do you want to come back on that, Liam, or you?
Yes, no, this was not a blame, no blame against the Commission or the EDF. I think there are controls on both sides. We have ITAR in the US. There are things we can and cannot do. It's a call, I guess, for collaboration to all sides, not just to the EU and to the Commission. That, again, just zooming out, looking at the bigger picture, there's too much at stake not to collaborate as much as possible. So if we cannot bring our best technologies and thinking into EDF projects because some of the barriers, there could be fault on the US side, there could be perhaps more flexibility on the EU side. We'd certainly like to work on it. And also, by the way, we need to, we understand the establishment rules, that you need to have an entity in the EU that is fully controlled in the EU. So we're cognizant of all of those issues, and of course we're working on those issues going forward.
Okay, thank you. And Julie, we touched on it a little bit as well. On Horizon Europe, there are these exemptions, right, for certain high-level quantum projects that the UK is not able to join.
Yeah.
Are those kind of exemptions, does that create uncertainty amongst imperial researchers? Are people not able to join projects that they would like to? What's the impact of those exemptions thus far?
For the individuals that work in those fields, yes, that they would obviously be impacted in a way that they would love to be working on those projects, and those projects would benefit from their brains as well, but they can't. But they're, in terms of numbers, they're few and far between. Yeah.
Now, Ninka, I appreciate the Horizon Europe is not your your bag here, but yeah, there have been these concerns from associated countries. I mean, Switzerland, the UK, that on this, it's less defense, more kind of sensitive technology, sort of security, quantum type technologies. It's still an only EU shop in some respects, plus maybe Norway, Switzerland, and so on, but excluding the UK on some quantum calls.
Yeah, so in EDF we only have one associated country, which is Norway, and we have no exclusion in whatever call for Norwegian entities whatsoever. For Horizon, yes, it's not my program, so I don't want to say too much about it. All I can say is that the vast majority of the calls, as you said, are open, and there's only a very few restricted calls, as I understand. And I know that in the aerospace, they're very much related to the fact that we have an EU infrastructure in space. So I would say it's understandable that in those areas, you also want then to have serenity and have make sure you're not dependent, no, when it comes to infrastructure. Although I also know in space there are also many corporations there when it comes to no dependencies that exist or ground stations, no. So I think it's overall, I think it's quite a balanced picture.
Okay. Thank you, thank you. I want to talk about the broader politics here. Ninka, Liam mentioned earlier that there is this perception that Europe buys too much American kit. Essentially, wants to have kind of more domestic in-house purchasing to build up Europe's defence industry. Now, as you see it, is the impact on defence R&D projects that there isn't, in your view, or at least in the EU's view, there isn't enough kind of internal domestic consumption of defence equipment within the EU?
Yeah, that's a real problem. When we saw the defense acquisitions after the start of Russia's war in Ukraine, 78% was bought from outside the EU. So that's a real issue. And also what we see is that most of the member states then spend in an isolated manner. I think we only had 18% of these procurements being done together, and I think there's already for years and years an existing benchmark by the EDA, European Defence Agency, that it should be 35 collective procurements. So the problem is that it's the fragmentation and it's the lack of buying power, and also the lack of orders by EU industry.
Okay. So the lack of orders mean that essentially European defence startups get bought up by, is it typically the US or other countries? Where do they typically get bought up by?
Well, specifically with startups that want to expand their business to defense, what we do in EU, we are financing R&D. But then when it comes to growing the companies and to investing in these companies with risk capital, then there are still many barriers. I already mentioned the barrier of the EIB, but also a lot of public banks have restrictions. So then, of course, these startups sometimes have no choice but to find their capital elsewhere. And then often this also comes with a relocation a requirement. So we do have a big problem there in Europe, which I think we should address. Okay. Yeah. Okay,
that makes sense. Liam, I mean, this is the point you were sort of trying to push back on earlier. This idea that it's a problem, or where the EU buys its defence equipment currently needs to change. Would you push back on Ninka's argument here that there needs to be much greater European procurement, because this is how you keep European defence startups in Europe with orders, with a viable business, rather than having to kind of sell out?
Look, let's just, again, look at the big picture here. If you look at the famous NATO 2% spending on defense of GDP, a decade ago, 3 countries were meeting 2%. Today, I think 24 countries of NATO are meeting 2%, and those numbers are going up rapidly. The world has changed. Unfortunately, there's plenty of business to go around here in the defense industry, in the defense space. I think we're all trying to ramp up as quickly as we can to meet the new challenges we face, particularly around Ukraine at the moment, but who knows what we will have further down the road. So I think this is not a case of, will Europe have a strong defense industry? I think Europe will have a strong defense industry. I think EDF and other programs are contributing to that. To me, that's a given. I don't think the European countries are going to continue buying off the shelf outside of the EU. I think certainly when the shock of the invasion of Ukraine happened, there was a bit of a rush to make sure that they had what they needed. But I think now there is a realization that Europe needs a strong and sustainable defense industrial base. And we fully support that. And we would like to collaborate as much as possible because some of the examples I gave earlier, that there is much more we can achieve if we work together and we bring the strength from both sides, a Boeing and a Saab, for example, than to try and do things alone. But if you ever go and talk to military leadership about compromising capability for sovereignty, that'll be a pretty short discussion. There needs to be both. There needs to be strength in Europe around its defense industry, but it shouldn't be some kind of artificial concept of sovereignty that drives you there. It should be that all boats are going to rise because of this new need we have.
I think plenty to go around to everyone. Does that make sense as an argument?
Yeah, and I just want to add that a lot of cooperation is going on, of course, when it comes more to the defense R&D. There is a lot of cooperation with NATO, a lot of cross-briefings going on, and also we now have the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, so there's a lot of cooperation and agreements also being made in areas like AI, semiconductors, supply chain. Of course, it requires also then security arrangements, so you need to find a frame for this cooperation. But there are a lot of new initiatives have been set up in recent years to achieve just that.
Sure, but I mean, in a few weeks we have a US election. If we have a second Trump presidency, Trade and Technology Council, a lot of these collaborations, we don't know the future of them under a new US administration. Is that a concern at all?
Yeah, of course, it's a concern. Insecurity is never good, though, yeah.
Okay, but I mean, do you have kind of contingency plans if that happens on R&D collaboration?
Well, we implement in DGDFS, the European Defence Fund, so it goes a bit beyond, but if you look at the political guidelines of the new Commission, if you look at the mission letter that has been sent by ARCA to our Commissioner designate, it speaks about being defense ready under the extreme contingencies. So, yeah, I think that already says it.
Well, yeah. On the UK side, there is also political change. A somewhat new, at least rhetorically, more Brussels-friendly Labour government in the UK that has, the new Prime Minister has claimed that there'll be a sort of reset of relations with the EU after a lot of Brexit-related strife. Julie, I wonder if I could get your views on the UK political situation at the moment and whether that will make it somewhat easier potentially to collaborate between the UK and the EU on sensitive R&D. What's your view, or will there be no change at all here?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, the vibes are very positive at the moment, and certainly the universities are very supportive as well. But we do respect, the EU and the UK does have its own trusted research policies and so on. But well, let's hope. I mean, we all have a common vision and goal, and there is a notion of trusted partnerships, and there's also other mechanisms that you can get the same results if you make something that's a core fundamental technology, for example. Demilitarize it and do the research on that. It can still be useful for many as well. So there's other ways around it.
Can you just explain a bit more about the demilitarizing research?
Okay, so for example, in defense agencies, there could be a situation whereby they know they need a certain type of technology, okay? And they know what they haven't got and what the challenges are. Well, a lot of that fundamental technology can be researched and the results given in partnerships, but it's not actually physically applied and demonstrated in a defense context. So, for example, really modern, strong, generative AI and so on can be, demilitarized and be used for many other things like healthcare and so on, yeah? And that's a way of getting the same sort of collaborations and the same sorts of knowledge to be gained.
That's interesting. Is that something you're doing more often to try and not get round the military component of some of these research projects, but it just makes some rules not apply? I'm curious about
it just makes some relationships more pliable and more fluid.
I mean, we've spoken a lot about EU programs here. Obviously, member states have huge defense R&D budgets. And so I wanted to ask Liam and Julie whether, if you see any barriers to working with member states. Are some particularly easy to work with? Are some particularly hard? Because obviously collaboration with the EU goes beyond just EU programs. I wonder if either of you would like to take that kind of question.
I can take that. So we do have bilateral relationships, specifically with France and Germany, just from Imperial's viewpoint. So we have tight relationships with TUM, for example, and CNRS in France. And also the UK itself has direct relationships both with France and Germany as well. So we do work together. It may not just be funded by EU funds as such. And to encourage us all to work together more, we do have a fund in Imperial to allow us to go and find new partnerships throughout Europe as well.
But do you do sensitive research, kind of security research with TUM and CRNS? Because I know you have these big partnerships, but I don't know whether it goes into in that kind of direction.
It's too fundamental. It is fundamental research, yeah. So it'll be down at TRL 1 to 3, and that can be applied to lots of different things, yeah. Yeah.
Liam, is there anything that Boeing, I'm sure you don't want to name names of member states.
Absolutely not.
Of course, I didn't think you would. But are there some easier to work with than others? Can I ask it that way?
Well, sure. I mean, some would be easier to, I'm not going to name names, but some would be easier to work with than others. And, if you work with a national research body, like in the UK, you have the relationships, it's easier to get stuff done maybe than, the EU process, and I'll go back to my experience on Horizon, it's quite complex. Putting that consortia together, meeting all of the rules, etc. It's worth it in the end because the outcome is usually very good, but you've just got a few more hoops to jump through, and therefore it could be tempting just to work through, a UK research institution or others. But look, I think this is why collaboration on defense, why collaboration at EU level is very important, because you've just got too much complexity going country by country. You don't have the scale. R&D in defense is extremely expensive, so you need that scale, you need the critical mass, and you need the EU to be driving that as much as possible.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all. We now have about 10 minutes or so for questions from the audience. Is there anyone who has a burning question they would like to ask the entire panel? One person in particular? Yes. Do we have a microphone? Or I can give you mine, Simon.
Just don't ask me who's going to win the US election, please.
We all know the answer to that.
Thank you, Madeleine. So Simon Pickard from Science Business. We had a really interesting opening session with Commission, NATO, and industry, talking about defense tech strategy. But one topic we didn't talk about in great depth was the complementarity between the investments that the EU is making in disruptive innovation or breakthrough technologies in defense and NATO. Because, of course, we have the Innovation Fund in the EU, we have EDF, we have the EIC and EIB relaxing their funding guidelines, NATO has its Innovation Fund and Diana initiative. So it's to Liam to begin with, but also to Julie and Ninka. How do you see the complementarity, or not, between what's being done on the NATO side to invest in the next generation of technologies and how that maps out with what the European Union is doing to support them?
We would hope that it would be complementary and that it would all piece together. We know that the NATO Innovation Fund 24 NATO members are a part of that. It doesn't have a huge amount of funding right now. I think we're talking about $1 billion in funding, but I think the idea is a very interesting one. When you think about NATO, it is basically Europe plus several other countries, including the US, Canada, Turkey. So there should be a clear read across between those two initiatives. And let's not forget the US also. They, of course, have their own DARPA landscape, which I think is quite an interesting reference point as well. DARPA, I think, encourages more risk-taking, I think we would argue. If you fail, it's fine. It's just kind of the US concept. Whereas I get the sense in Europe it's a little bit more restrictive on that front. So if we can bring the best of all of these approaches and try and bring them together in some way, at least make them complementary. I think the worst thing that we could do, by the way, in talking EU, NATO, and I was at a big security conference yesterday, and an MEP made this point. We set up structures that basically are looking at the same thing and doing the same thing, and you put all of the administration and all of the bureaucracy around basically the same thing. I think that would be a huge mistake, and I do think there needs to be a lot more collaboration between NATO and the EU. We're sitting in the same city, but I don't see a lot of read across necessarily in those two organizations.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, putting this question across to Julie, first of all, I mean, does Imperial have anything to do with the NATO's Diana at all? I'm wondering whether you've interacted with it.
Yeah, well, they're physically in our buildings, so.
Are they? Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Right.
And they're headed up. One of their more senior people in London is headed up by an Imperial. Well, he's an Imperial guy seconded. So yes, but not funded that I know of. Yeah, there is a relationship there. There are conversations about collaboration.
They've not yet led to any kind of projects for Imperial within.
There may be. I'm not aware.
Okay.
Of. Yeah.
Okay. Fine. And now, Ninka, turning to you. I mean, yeah, this is a very interesting question about the relationship between, say, the EDF and something like NATO's Diana. I mean, what are the kind of, how can they collaborate, and what are the boundaries there?
Well, so with EDF, we spend like €1 billion a year. NATO Diana, you asked the question, so maybe you know, it's much smaller.
50 million.
But how much have they invested in companies now?
No, it's a very good marketing exercise.
So, and of course, it's much smaller scale, no? It's much smaller money. It's, of course, with different entities, no? It's with US, Canada, UK. I saw that, they also, quite a few of those small companies made it to the second stage. So for me, it's perfectly complementary. Of course, we look at the same technologies, but it's normal because those are the technologies that would change the way we do defense. So what the instruments that we have under the EDF, which are also targeting SMEs and are typically, say, for us, smaller funding, like 3 million. So it would be a nice step up, for startups that have been grown a bit in Diana with some money, maybe from the Diana or NATO Innovation Fund. Then they can move to the EDF to do more collaborative research and development. And that's very important for us to become part of the supply chains for the bigger companies, because you need also to provide them a part, no? So and I think for us in Europe also the NATO Innovation Fund also, I think it's very good, and it gave an important signaling function as well, that yes, we can invest in small defense startups. So I hope it also will convince the EIB to be a bit more open, and the EIF to be a bit more open to that.
I will just make one more general comment, though, and this comes from the recent Draghi report into competitiveness. He had some really startling statistics in there. I think going back to 2012, 30% of EU startups only scaled when they left the European Union. So I think there is a message in there which obviously would apply in this space as well. And this is a message for the new Commission. We need to have a much more competitiveness mindset than we have had to date in the European Union. Otherwise, we're not going to get the startup scaling. We need to complete the single market as well, because I think that was another glaring message from his report, that the reason these startups have to leave is because they simply can't scale yet in the European Union.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on what you said, Ninka. I mean, I take the point that these funds are very different scales, right? The EDF is much, much bigger. But having said that, I mean, do you get on the phone with them ever at all to coordinate what you would work on? Or is that just completely out of the question?
We collaborate a lot with NATO.
Yeah. Okay. So you for example, you try not to have overlapping calls, this kind of thing?
Well, we don't. It's with NATO. They're two different organizations. So the programming of EDF is based. No, we have a programming until 2027, which broadly sets out the line, and then it's also the member states to decide what we put every year in the priorities. But if you look at the technologies we fund in EDF, material and components, energy, environment, cyber, digital transformation, it's of course the same type of technologies that NATO with Diana is also targeting.
Sure. But I guess the risk is that then you have kind of overlapping or duplicate calls, or you don't see that as a risk?
But Diana works quite differently, so you have very short, but you also have very low success rate. So it's a kind of a different instrument.
We have time for, I think, maybe one or two more questions over here. Oh, yes, Frank with the microphone. He already has it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a general question. I mean, we're looking at an EU competitiveness fund, which should include defence and security, EDF type action. At least we were told that this morning. So I suppose looking to the future, you mentioned that only Norway has joined the EDF as an associated country. That's largely because the rules currently only allow EEA countries to associate. Is that something that should be reviewed? I suppose this one for the panel of, if it were aligned with the Horizon rules, would that provide a good model moving forward for association of third countries? Thanks.
I guess I have to reply.
I think you might be the main target of that question, Inka, but we can go through the whole panel.
So when it comes to associated countries, yes, well, we have a program, like I said, our legal base is to European industrial policy, so it needs to fit in that. And then the regulation says EFTA, EEA, EFTA countries, and Norway has been associated. So then, it's up to what the political outcome is also of the negotiations, but still our legal base is European industrial policy, and we have a lot of problems to solve still in Europe.
Okay. So expanding beyond Norway, I mean, the chances of, could you ever see that happening?
Why not? I mean, it's just a matter of politics and yeah.
Would you like the UK to maybe join the EDF? Putting it very bluntly.
Yeah, I think we would. I think we have a lot to contribute, and yeah.
Well, again, going back to my original point, we just got to find a way to collaborate as much as possible. So we got to get over some of these hurdles and sensitivities, and we need to bring it together as much as possible. And if there are issues like IP issues, we need to work on them as well. I hesitate to mention this word in a room in Brussels, but I will mention AUKUS between the UK, Australia, and the US. They also dealt with some of these very sensitive issues around IP transfer, and they appear to have overcome them. So where there is a will, there is a way. And I think we, again, looking at the threat we face, we just have to maybe abandon some of our old thinking, and we need to work together.
Okay, thank you very much for that comment. I'm afraid we've run out of time. This session is, I'm sorry there were more questions in the audience, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Thank you all very much. This has been a really, really interesting panel. Hopefully we come away a little bit more enlightened about some of the hurdles, but also lots of the opportunities and collaborate better together in the future. Next up, we have a session on digital security, and R&D in digital security with my colleague, Rafaela. But before then, can we just give a big round of applause for all the panelists? Thank you so much. Hand over to you, Rafael.
Perfect, very good. No rest for the wicked. There is no pause between the previous session and this one, but we will be quite fast, no worries. My name is Raffaele Gorini, Policy Officer at Science Business, and I'm really, really excited to open this panel that will focus on digital security. It's a big topic. We have seen it all over the news over the summer. Cyber attacks are increasing, hybrid threats, and unfortunately, we are all connected to the internet. All organizations, not only research organizations, but everyone in Europe is connected somehow digitally to everyone else. And that doesn't decrease the number of possible threats that you find in your life. Now, to discuss this, I would actually invite on the stage 3 very, very nice panelists that I'm really, really glad to introduce to all of you. First one is Dan Nechita. Now, Dan used to be one of the masterminds behind the AI Act, and now he's funding partner at Vanguard Europe. So Dan, please. Then next one is Irina Kupiainen. Irina, you're Director of Public Affairs at CSCIT in Finland. Please join us on stage. And last but not least, Kia Slebek Jensen. Did I pronounce that correctly? Very good. Cyber attaché at the Danish Permanent Representation to the European Union. So thank you very much for joining us. And now, so digital security. I would like to start first then with you, because the AI Act was probably the biggest event in terms of digital regulation this year. Congratulations on arriving at the finishing line. In terms of security, my main question is, while you were drafting the AI Act, did research security play a role? Let's say research consideration, did they play a role in defining the main priorities of the AI Act? Or was it not really the main, let's say, area of focus for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here and see some familiar faces in the audience from my previous life in the Parliament. That's an easy question to answer, so I'm going to try to make it more complex. So the short answer is not really, because the European Union doesn't have competences in the area of security and defense, right? So there was a very clear exemption in the AI Act for everything related to military. And then, of course, there is also a very, I would say, gray area exemption for national security in the whole regulation. So that's the short answer. I would say that and of course there's an exemption for research and innovation before putting AI products on the market. That is not just for security. I would say that the long answer, or the longer answer here is, of course, we thought about these topics and we thought, okay, how could the AI Act have an influence on it? And at one point or another, there were discussions to make explicit references to cover, for example, dual-use technologies, right, in the AI Act. We decided against it. So that we don't create frictions in that particular exemption. But I would probably say, from the regulatory point of view, so from the AI Act point of view, that Some of the requirements in the AI Act, especially when you're dealing with very sensitive technologies, are not bad to fulfill, right? So especially when you're building dual-use technology, going through the requirements in there, making the technology safer, is good, and probably even a little bit under what you would require of AI when you sell into the military. In some cases, of course, there is also a lot of innovation going on, especially in areas of conflict where you don't have the time to go through all of those steps. But eventually, commercial success, and I'll spend 1 second on that too, commercial success comes from, you know, following some of the guidelines there. And it's probably going to be connected also with some of the funding that is going to be, you know, stimulated by the European Commission. And then maybe last, on this train of thought, is that when thinking not just about AI, but most dual-use technologies, we hear a lot of talk about stimulating investment, and I agree with that. But I think what we also need, and this is where some of the rules that we've defined at the European level will come into play, what we also need to do is to stimulate demand. And you know, when that happens, and when, you know, there is that demand stimulated, hopefully from member states and at the European level, then again, some of those rules there will help, you know, sell more into those entities that do the purchasing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. It was not that long of an answer. We could have expected worse, but
I'll remember that for the next question.
Perfect. But so now moving on to the member states. So the people responsible for this. Now, if we talk about awareness from, let's say, EU legislation in terms of what are the requirements for research security in digital matters, what about the people on the field? So do you think that researchers, now particularly in Denmark, and then we will get to Finland, but do you think that there is a wide awareness of what research security means if we're talking about digital technologies?
I hope so. It's always, of course, difficult, but it's something we've been working on for quite a while, at least. So just some background information is that in Denmark our work with cybersecurity in general, it's decentralized. So that means that every ministry for each sector has a responsibility to ensure that cybersecurity is dealt with in that ministry as well. So that means that for research, we've had a focus on it for quite a while. We have a cert for the research center, which is one of the first certs we've developed in Denmark, because there was a specific cyber attack on the Danish research network. This is back in the 90s, so the technology is a bit old. But that led to attempts at hacking into NASA from Denmark, which led to the creation of one of the first certs in Denmark. So it's something that we've been aware of for quite a while. It's also something we're continuously working with. Our National Center for Cybersecurity does these sectoral specific threat assessments that are public, so not classified. We also do classified, but these ones are public. And the one we've done most recently for the research sector really has heightened the threat level from high to very high when it comes to cyber espionage, especially within the fields that work with technology, dual use, energy, because there are a lot of different reasons why state actors are interested in getting this information, but it's something we're increasingly seeing. So it has been a focus area. We've also, in our national strategy for cyber and information security, given the task to each ministry to make their own strategy. So we have a strategy specifically for cyber and information security from the Ministry of Education and Research. And this, of course, is a balancing act, because I don't know if you know, but Denmark is a very small country. We don't have that many research institutions, and most of the ones we have are linked to universities. And in Denmark, the universities have quite a specific profile, a specific status, so they have a lot of freedom in how they organize themselves, how they fund them, how they use their funding from the state, what they research, how they do it, which means that there are limitations on how we can legally set up requirements. So we do a lot of instead interwork, institutional work, intergovernmental work on how to improve security there. So the strategy sets out a bunch of initiatives that are focused on sort of 4 main pillars, which is ensuring that the leadership is responsible, so that every layer in the university organizations and the research organizations have knowledge about cybersecurity and the risks they're facing, that we have a risk-based approach, that we collaborate across the different universities, because again, they are independent, so they don't have to, but we're trying to set up the fora for that.
Likely there are not too many, right?
No, only 8, so it's okay. But so we're trying to do a lot of that. And then, of course, we have the CERT DK, which is this first CERT that was created in Denmark. That's also really involved in creating warnings and really giving basic guidance as well, specifically targeted to the research sector. So we have, again, the national center that do a lot of guidance and a lot of awareness campaigns, but then within each sector they try to take that and then really specialize it for each sector as well. So it's something we've worked on. So I think it's something that in the recent years, especially with geopolitical tensions and everything, that there is a much bigger awareness of. It's also in general research. Security as such is something we've focused on quite a bit in the recent years. But cyber and cyber espionage is definitely a key threat that is faced, and something we've tried really hard to get researchers to know about. If they do and if they utilize it is of course different, but we have been working on it for
At least they know about it.
They should.
Very good. Let's hope so. Irina, do you have a similar view on this? You work a lot with research organizations as well. You provide systems for them, and I mean, you're very close neighbors with Russia, so you know especially how it goes in international collaboration, how research security matters can really have an impact on the work that researchers do. So how do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, of course, CSC as a publicly owned research infrastructure provider, we have to comply to all the regulations that concern this area, and that is very well in line, of course, with what has been there already. I mean, in terms of cybersecurity and preparedness, it has always been there, basically. I mean, cybersecurity is not a new topic, and even in the current situation, of course, it's business as usual for us. But I would actually like to take this a bit beyond the cybersecurity as such, because I think it's about the resilience through the awareness and the understanding of how we use our data, research data, of course, but any kind of data. But in the context of research, how we handle, manage, process the research data, what are the services and tools that we use, are they reliable, are they secure, is it something that we can control, are we able to even know what eventually happens with our data. So my point is that in Europe there are technology initiatives already built throughout for example, EuroHPC has been started already a couple of commission mandates ago, and it is about building European research infrastructures with European money that can provide tools where European researchers and companies as well can handle their data in an environment that where the data doesn't leak. It can be processed with powerful tools so that we can really advance both basic research, scientific breakthroughs. We can build understanding of the world through these tools, and we can boost SMEs and startups in Europe and now with the new AI factories initiatives, we can even more boost the AI. That is one thing. Then, of course, there are others, such as the European data spaces. European Open Science Cloud has been an initiative for building the European capabilities. There are some technology gaps still there. I can maybe come back to these later in the discussion. But my point is that these, critical infrastructures have been mentioned today already, and I would definitely see research infrastructures as critical infrastructures, and it's really important that we understand also that every citizen is all the time sharing their personal data through our mobile devices, and we do not know what happens with that data, who will use it, and for what purposes. So also to broaden this more even to all the citizens, basically to have the awareness of the risks and the opportunities of digital technologies, and what might be the consequences of this for security when we talk about how our data might be used for purposes of damaging democracies, trying to break European unity, trying to question the European values. So that's something that we also need to think about when we talk about technology.
Absolutely, we do. And thank you very much for anticipating a couple of the points that I would like to touch on first, because indeed, when we talk about digital security priorities and what does that mean for research and innovation agendas, what's the next big things? What are the critical technology gaps that we still have to solve? And in particular, mainly from the regulation side, then you worked on the AI Act. What's going to be the next big thing, the next AI Act for Europe that we really need to, let's say, assess our digital priorities?
So I do believe that we've done a good job to begin with that, right? Because you have all of that.
You have done a job in particular. Thank you very much.
It's a lot of people who work not just on the AI Act, but on the Data Act, on Data Governance Act, on DMA, on DSA. So I'll start with that, because you have now a little, very aggressive campaign trying to push, especially in this time when the Commission is settling into place, you have a new parliament, there's this campaign to say, okay, well, no, too much regulation and so on. So I think what we've done was good. But I am of the opinion now that we need to focus on competitiveness, we need to focus on implementation, we need to focus on making those rules work. So I am, supportive of the idea we shouldn't have too many more rules coming into place. Let's make the ones that we have now work. That doesn't negate the fact that I'm really content with what we've done before. I think that the European Commission and the President of the Commission cannot go and say, what I will do in this mandate will be nothing. Just let the rules play themselves out. And then MEPs especially, they're politically elected, right? They will not go to their constituency and say, oh, yeah, well, I want to see the market go for a little, like 5 years. So I'm just going to chill. They will be passing regulation, right? What I would like to see is the continuation of the data spaces, right? Because we had like 8 or 9 proposed, and we have one on health, but these could unlock a little bit the data flows, and there is one probably for defense in that list, and that's going to be important. I would like to see an effort, a horizontal effort to solve the overlaps in the digital regulations and to help member states to implement the regulations, because member states are going to get hit now. When regulations come into effect, member states are going to say, oh, I need to have an authority for this, an authority for that, an authority for that. So helping to put these all together. And then what I would like to see in this push, this is also the focus of my activity and what I'm building now, is I'd like to see a lot of effort going into emerging technologies with dual use, because these serve two different demands at the same time. You have that demand for innovation, for competitiveness, for digital adoption, digital transformation, all of it commercial, right? We're very low on AI adoption, for example. And then on the other hand, they serve, you know, the needs to modernize our military capabilities and to build that defense industrial base in Europe that is on one hand complementary to NATO, but then on the other hand, you know, you can just increase the production line for 25-year-old tanks because it's not really what we need now in this day and age. So I would like to see, you know, that energy going into the dual-use space, serving both, you know, both areas at the same time. I'm not sure it's done necessarily through regulation, but it can be done, and I think, you know, it's going to be interesting to watch.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now then, Irina, about those critical technology gaps, what would you say are the ones we should focus on moving forward?
Yes, thank you. This is my favorite topic because I like concrete solutions, and especially in this context, it's something that you know, sometimes we need to think about what is the concrete thing we need to do. Of course, regulation is one aspect, but what kind of technologies do we need to build in order to make this actually work? So I have two examples. There are, of course, many more. I won't talk about chips. I won't talk about components, but I have two infrastructures. First one is about the lack of a European web index. When web index is a technology that crawls and kind of harvests data from the internet, so any kind of data that is out there. And currently, Europe is dependent on non-European web indices, meaning Google, Microsoft, then we have Chinese and Russian actors, maybe from the with the existing kind of tools and frameworks there are on the policy level. Maybe China, Russia are quite easy to exclude, but these two others that I mentioned, if we think that every European citizen is doing various web searches every day, they are basically based on something that is untransparent. It's a black box. It's biased. It's based on certain cultural values and bases. And in addition, as we know nowadays, the quality of the searches has gone down because the advertisers' commercial interests are quite heavily represented there. So then it's not even about promoting equally big and small businesses, but it's about something else. And therefore, for actually making the data available for equally for building a level playing field for European companies, startups, technology actors, researchers, public administration, everybody who uses data, it requires to build a European web index. There is already a Horizon Europe project called Open Web Search that is doing it. You can, I was about to say you can Google it, but you can, you can look it up.
We'll give you the URL, the exact URL.
From the internet, yes. What it's all about, and it's really something that I'm quite excited about because it is based on European values. It is based on European language models. It is run by several big computing centers in Europe. And it's really meant to be transparent, open, so that everybody can see how the searches are developed. And I really like this because it is said that for example, Anu Bradford says that Europe has a value-based system, and what it actually means and how it could be brought to life is through these kinds of joint infrastructures that we recognize as critical for Europe, and that enables the data to be used, because I think that is missing now from the ecosystem. If we have data spaces, we have your HPC, and that would be a very, very important element, and I hope that this could be made a more permanent, sustainable structure. It would be critical. The other one is network connectivity, and specifically to leverage the Arctic area for building international network connections. Currently, we are basically dependent on routes that go through Americas, Russia, Suez, and we all know that's not a good situation. So that is another technology area that we need to pay attention to.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now, Kia, member states, you are the ones implementing stuff. So sorry if you want to complain about the job amount. Here we have a primary example. But how do we make sure that the researchers are actually involved in shaping up these legislations, because they need to have a voice there. We need to reflect the discoveries that we're making nowadays and the discoveries that we will make tomorrow. So do you have plans already, for example, in Denmark, where you have researchers involved in...
Yeah, no, first I'd like to say I think we, as member states, would like to have a break for 5 years and to just implement that. That would be lovely. I know it's unrealistic, but it's a lot of legislation. It would be nice to just have a little breather. No, we're expecting that to happen. And yeah, I think it's always something that we, in the ideal world, would do a lot more than what we do, because it is, of course, difficult to get into the normal governance system when we're passing and doing legislations. Again, we are not creating it. That is the Commission for most of these big European legislations. So for us, we try to involve research on this. Again, and I'm sorry, I can only speak on cybersecurity. That's what I know. So in cybersecurity, we are trying to bridge the gap and include the research sector as well. Maybe not such as for individual researchers, but more for the organizations behind it. So we created 4 years back, I think, a cybersecurity council, which sounds very formal, but it's not. It's a collaboration between the private sector, the public sector, and the research sector to sort of bring together experts within the cybersecurity field. So we have researchers, we also have representatives from universities who are more technical. We have representatives from different private companies in Denmark and from different parts of the public sector. And this is a policy and strategic collaboration. So we're not discussing practical solutions, but we're discussing policy and how to improve that, and also how to, of course, include the research sector there. So we have 19 members of this, and some concrete things they've done. Again, they also knowledge share, but they have an impact on policy. For instance, our national cybersecurity strategy. Were only existing when we created the most recent version, but they also gave input to that, came with ideas for initiatives, so different things in that regard. You can also, if you read our national strategy, research is mentioned more there now than it was before. So in that regard, we are involved. When we talk more about how we make policy in general regarding EU legislation, we don't have anything specific for the research sector. We have it more as the open venues that we already have are some things that they can come in through. So we do public hearings, public consultations for every single piece of legislation, and sometimes we get input and sometimes we don't. It depends a bit. But we are trying, especially in the field of cybersecurity, which is really well, it's really fastly evolving, and it moves really quickly. And of course, we also want our cybersecurity to be based on the most cutting-edge technology. So one of the things we've done in Denmark is that we've created what we call I think industrial PhDs, sorry. We've created industrial PhDs at the Center for Cybersecurity. So these are technical PhDs, not anything social, economic related, but specifically technical PhDs, where we employ the PhD students at the Danish Center for Cybersecurity. So they'll have to do some tasks where we can also include research knowledge, but they will also, of course, have time to research, and they can also utilize. Again, there are some rules about this, but they can utilize the data we have at the Center for Cybersecurity and really dive into sort of both classified and unclassified things to develop new technologies that can be used within the field. And we've had 2 calls for it. There's one that just closed, but where the 3 PhD students will start up here in the 1st of January. So that's a way we're doing it. We're also including, for instance, one of the options was to focus on AI and cybersecurity in this and develop in that field. So that's something we're trying to do to link research more directly with the practitioners who will actually have to use it in the real cyber world.
Very good. If you're successful in that, please let us know. Some people have been trying for some time to do that.
We have had 2 calls. So the first one has been ongoing. We did get PhD students that applied for it. We have hired them at the center. They are involved with PhD. Those calls were posted in 2022. So they started here, I think it was like fall 2022, so they've been doing it since 2023. So they're still there, but we have PhD students at the center, so this is the 2nd iteration.
Very good. Before the audience get tired of my questions, I would like to give you the option to ask questions of your own, if you have them. I would hope you have them, because we have very interesting speakers here. So if you have questions, please raise your hands. We have one there. Very good.
Thank you very much for your conversation. Very interesting. This is a question for Kia, mostly, coming from a university like yourselves. Is there? You mentioned rolling out a cybersecurity set of, I don't know, rules, regs, whatever, to the universities. Have you seen any pushback from the universities whereby some of the regulations or some of the policies that you'd like to implement to make the universities safer actually hinder research in some way?
I mean, there's always pushback from universities when you try to give them rules. So again, like I wanted to say, we don't regulate them as such. That I think is one of the ways. A lot of the initiatives we're doing there is really collaborative. So it's not so much we're saying you have to live up to NIS2 in this way, but we're saying we need to do this. And I think the way we're looking at it, and also the way we're trying to narrate it throughout universities, is that we need to have a secure core in order to protect the openness that's necessary for research. So yes, you can't just share your password with everyone. We're sorry, don't do that. So we're trying to base it a lot on established best practice. We're trying to, of course, change the understanding of risks and how you make risk assessments in your day-to-day life. That's what's fascinating about the research sector regarding cybersecurity, is that we really do have to get individuals to do this here. We can't just give them all the same computer and say you can only do this, because that's not how it works. So we're trying to do that. We're trying to also buy into the way things function at universities, but also at the same time heighten the understanding of security. And yes, there's definitely been pushback. I think not so much on the cyber issues. I think for that we have had enough examples that it's very concrete for them and they understand it. But we have had some discussion more in general research security and knowledge security, and that has received a lot more pushback. Might also be because they're talking to very intelligence-oriented people who really focus on security, who need to guide them, and it's really a clash of cultures. So I think in that and with everything when it comes to security, you really need to have translators who are able to understand both the sector but also the requirements, and that's difficult skills to find. But we're a small country, so we try to really collaborate with these initiatives so that we don't enforce something that's not enforceable.
Thank you very much. I see another question here in the front, and then another one in the back.
Thank you. I have a quick question for Dan, primarily, but Fakir and Irina, please comment as well. Dan, in the AI Act, there's a lot of emphasis on transparency, high quality, and in the overall governance of the development of AI systems. But once you get into dual use and drifting more towards the defense side, the transparency issue becomes more complicated or sensitive, potentially. So I just wonder if you feel that when we're talking about AI on that spectrum towards dual use and then potentially beyond, whether these same principles of responsible development and use and transparency will hold.
That is, of course, following up some of our conversations, that's a tough question. I think that the AI Act is not just about transparency. So the AI Act has, when you're building a high-risk AI system, you have a number of things that you need to do. You have to have a risk management system in place. You have to have good data management. You have to have transparency. You also have to have cybersecurity for your system. You also have to have, logging capabilities. These are basically elements of how you build a system to make it safer to use, especially in a high-risk scenario. Some of these are applicable no matter what. Having good quality data, especially in a military context, is a definite must. Some of them are not necessarily the types of requirements you would want, like making public, things that you're required when you go commercial. But I think that there is, on one hand, the AI Act doesn't apply to purely military uses. When you go into the dual use space and you're building a technology, and I'm talking here mostly about AI, when you're building an AI and you want to go with it commercially and to also sell into defense applications, then when you go commercial, you're going to have to build it like that anyway. And then, of course, you're going to have to adapt it for the military domain. My argument and thesis is that if you go through it and see what you can fulfill from day one, building a product that is competitive and compliant from day one will allow you to conquer both markets at the same time. If you just specialize and you sell directly into defense, but then you see, okay, well, this AI actually has so many other applications, you might end up later down the line, 3 or 4 years, with a lot of compliance requirements that you haven't fulfilled in the beginning. But to your question, of course, when you go defense, you don't need some of those transparency obligations, and that makes perfect sense, and that's why defense, one of the reasons why defense is not in scope of the AI Act.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I don't know if someone else wants to pick up on that. If not, Tadas, I think you have a question.
Yes, thank you very much. So my name is Tadas Tumenas, Lithuanian R&D Liaison Office in Brussels. So my question is actually related not to AI Act, because we were talking a lot about it. My question is actually about the NIS2 directive, because the scope of the NIS2 has been broadened a little bit, and of course, the research institutes and universities could be covered by NIS2, especially, the ones who are dealing with international cooperation or, having certain type of data and et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, how do you think it's impacting, this kind of research institutes and universities? I mean, this new NIS2, well, no, it's not new anymore, but still.
Yeah, no, I think, again, hopefully NIS2, I think the hope is that NIS2 will give a framework to deal with cybersecurity, but that there's nothing majorly inventive in it in the way that these are not basic requirements that oral organizations hopefully would already naturally live up to. So again, it will depend on each university. Again, like I said, there are some hesitancy, but I think from our side, every sector I've spoken to regarding NIS2, and this is not just specifically research, is really in favor of getting some clarity, of trying to make some more horizontal requirements. Again, I know that we can lift it, but I think from a Danish perspective, we're trying really hard to maintain the same requirements, except for a few sectors where we do see the need to be more in line with our previous legislation, because we had quite harsh cybersecurity requirements for the energy sector and the financial sector. So for those, we have added to it. But I think NIS2 is going to be difficult for most entities that are now within scope, but also that it's really necessary, and that most of these things are things that are already best practice or good practice, not something that will require insane investments. And we're going to, of course, try to educate and bring awareness and guide as best as possible for all sectors. I don't think the research sector is going to face, at least in the Danish perspective, extra challenges compared to some of the others. I think from our side, we are much more concerned about SMEs than we are about universities who already have some experience in this field. I hope that answered some of your questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I don't know, Dan, if you wanted to add something on this, because I saw you.
No, I agree.
Very good. Perfect. That's a perfect conclusion then to this panel. Thank you very much for those who joined us online, and thank you to those in the room. Thank you to my panelists. And I think we have a break now, so we can go for that, and we'll resume back at 4 with the interview to a member of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. So make sure to tune in for that. Thank you very much.